Hello, Apollonia Pina Chahajifkaros, Ijuogi Omalegidados. So, my name, I just introduced myself in the Muskogee language. You said we needed to introduce ourselves. I said what my name is, Apollonia, and I said what clan I am, which is Deer Clan. So, here's the video portion of the final. And I wanted to write about Native Americans in rock and roll music, and I specifically chose rock and roll because that is the genre of music that I feel most at home in. I come from a musical family, and I myself used to play drums in some punk and metal bands, so I thought it would be really fun to go and see what other Native Americans have contributed to rock and roll. And I thought I knew a good amount, but I learned a lot more researching for this paper. Um, there was a lot I could have chose to write about for this paper, um, but this is the topic that I chose. I already am very interested in Native American music. I will use this as an opportunity to show off some of my personal records that I still listen to. I'm one of those people that still collects LPs. I have Songs of the Muskogee Creek, Volume 1, original pressing. I also have Volume 2, and that's a collection of stomp dance music that was collected here in Oklahoma. And then here's some other ones as well. And this is totally just shamelessly me showing off my records. I'm just being honest about that. So, the way that I wrote my paper is that I went through Native Americans in rock and roll through the decades, and the earliest that I could find mention of was Charlie Patton, and he was from Mississippi and is considered to be the godfather of Mississippi Delta blues. And he was pretty significant because he went on to then influence Robert Johnson, and Robert Johnson definitely is considered um, one of the precursors to rock and roll. It's not rock and roll in its truest form, but blues was considered the precursor to it. And so I wanted to give a sample of what Charlie Patton sounds like. This is a song called Spoonful Blues. So he was from Mississippi, as I mentioned, and it was, you can't trace it necessarily through true genealogy because due to segregation, due to him being African American predominantly, they didn't have the best records, genealogical records, but it's considered that he is of Choctaw descent, had Choctaw blood in him. And I believe that because the Choctaw Indians are from that area. So moving along, the next decade that I looked at was the 1950s, and this is a pretty huge one because this is Link Wray, who definitely is a Shawnee Indian guy. And if there's one thing that I learned from this paper is that it was a one-lunged Shawnee Indian guy that basically invented punk rock because Link Wray, with his song Rumble, he's considered the godfather of the power chord, which went to be used predominantly in punk rock and metal, heavy rock. So here's a sample of what he sounds like. Everybody has heard of this. Basically, if you've seen a Quentin Tarantino movie, you've probably heard that song. And so moving along, I had categorized the 1960s and the 1970s together because those two decades were huge decades for Native Americans making music, and a big part of that was because of the Red Power movement that was going on at the time. African Americans had the Civil Rights Movement, Native Americans had the Red Power Movement, and AIM, the American Indian Movement, was one of the biggest organizations that were really doing a lot of organizing to promote self determination for Native Americans. So naturally, a lot of music came out from those eras, and Native Americans also began making a lot of folk music and rock music, talking about what was going on during that time period and what the experience was like. Buffy Sainte-Marie was a predominant figure during that era, and I will again show off my record collection because I have also an original LP of hers. And so I'm going to play one of her songs that I'm a big fan of. It's Native North American Child. I myself just had a son a few months ago, March, so I've definitely been playing this song a lot.
Who's got the prairie sun in every smile? Who's got good credit yet with all Mother Nature? Ooh, Native North American child. Who's got the rhythm of the universe inside it? Who taught the...
So that was an example of Buffy Sainte-Marie. She was Cree Indian from Canada originally, but then ended up being adopted and growing up in Massachusetts. I didn't quite include that in the paper, but that's more to her. What is very interesting about her as well that I learned researching for this is that Buffy Sainte-Marie was blacklisted initially by Lyndon B. Johnson, and then even more so by Richard Nixon because her music, they thought it influenced the Native Americans too much, and so they were trying to suppress her so that, as a means of stifling their protest, Native Americans' protest, and speaking out against the government. Another important singer to come out, well, it's kind of a lot of singers, and so the next section I focused on was folk singers that were coming out of Canada. There was actually a lot, and I only heard of them recently, as in the past 2 years. There was a 3 LP set that was released from Light in the Attic Records, and it was called Aboriginal Native North America Volume 1, and when it came out, I actually had to be put on a waiting list for this because it the first pressing had sold out already, so I actually had to wait 3 months to get this. But there's some really good stuff that came out of this, and Willie Dunn was one of them, and his songs really stood out to me, and he reminds me a lot of Neil Young, as well as another guy that I'm about to play here in a second. And basically everybody up there was either Cree or they were Inuit. And so here's a sample of what Willie Dunn sounds like. He's a very talented musician and vocalist.
I pity the country, I pity its state, and the mind of the man who thrives on hate. Smaller the lives.
That came out in 1973. More bands that came out from that time. There was another band called Sugluk, and that, I don't know what it means, but I know that Sugluk is Inuit. Here's a sample of them. They are more garage rock from that time. This would have been the 1970s.
I think I'll write a song
a different song for you. Reminds of love we had and never found any when we were alone.
Another band that came out during that time in the 1970s was a group. It was an all Inuit band, and they were called Sikamute. I'm almost certain I'm saying that wrong and not doing justice to it, but here's a sample of what they sound like. What's cool about them is that they actually sing in their language, in the Inuit language, and in the liner notes of the records I eventually got after a few months. It's really cool because their lyrics are printed in English, but also in the Inuit syllabary, which is a very unique looking syllabary. So that was in the Inuit language. And going on, this is one of the people that stood out the most to me from that Canadian Aboriginal rock music coming out of that time is Willie Mitchell and the Desert River Band. This song is very haunting, and I'm surprised they didn't have more commercial success because I think that this song and the lyrics and the vocalization and music is on par with Neil Young, and I think you'll see why here in a second.
Sitting around the fire, burning grass and chanting to himself. The only sound you heard was someone talking, and the sound of the fire making love. Deep inside your soul, the spirit's listening.
That was just a sampling of that. I could have listened to that song in its entirety, to be honest. So I'm going to end this with a snippet. We're kind of jumping ahead now. Something else that I could have played, but I'm running out of time, is Romeo Void. That song, Never, Never Say Never. She's actually Indian. I didn't know that. That's something that I learned researching for this paper. And she is Cowlitz, which is a Canadian tribe. And so I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the people more in modern times. I just mentioned Romeo Void, and that was in the 1980s. A Tribe Called Red is somebody that I think is worth mentioning. They formed in about 2010, I think, is when they formed, and they continue to make music. I got to see them live. They're really fun live, and I'm going to end, though, with a group that I really like, because I really like punk rock, is this all-female band called Lozen. Lozen, who in history was, and she existed in real life, but she was a Apache female warrior, and that's who they named their band after. It's an all-female band, drummer and a guitarist, and they're both Apache girls. And this is what they sound like. So that was Lozen, and they still tour. I haven't had a chance to see them, but many of my friends have, but they still go on tour. So I could have talked more about even just rock bands and Native American musicians specific to Oklahoma that are going around that still play right now. Samantha Crane and Kaylin Faye Barnowski come to mind immediately, but I had to conclude the paper. But I did want to say that I thought it was interesting to learn that Native Americans in some form or the other were there at the beginning of rock and roll music and are still in it. And it was a Shawnee guy, Link Ray that is, that can be contributed with kind of jump starting punk rock. That was pretty cool to mention. So that is what I have to say about that. Thank you. Mado.